Hello everybody, this is Pete from iDrewBench.com. Today we're going to take a look at Chitubox Pro. And in all fairness, let me just explain. Chitubox contacted me and asked me if I'd like to review this product, and I thought it would be a great time to do a video about it. So I'm going to go over Chitubox Pro's features, not all of them, but most of them, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts and opinions. While they did offer this product to me for free, I do want to tell you that I will give this my honest and best opinion of whether or not it is worth the $169, I believe, at the current cost per year for a subscription. I'm not a big fan of subscriptions, but some people like them because you always get the latest versions and it doesn't cost you a whole lot. Now, I'm not going to do a comparison against Chitubox Basic or Free, but we'll kind of do a little bit of comparing because most of us, unless you've lived under a rock, if you have a resin 3D printer, you are probably using Chitubox Basic or Chitubox Free. The current version of Chitubox Pro is available for Windows 10. It is not yet available for Macintosh or Linux. I believe the Macintosh version, from what I was told, is coming out closer towards the end of this month, which is really great because that's what I would work on. I happen to like modeling on a Macintosh better than a Windows PC. And so if you're waiting for that, you don't have to wait very long. And now I'm going to dive into the Chitubox Pro application and let you know my thoughts and show you around, and you can determine whether or not it's going to work for you. Let's get started. Okay, so when you first open the program, what you're going to see is this window here, and this is the main form screen of the Chitubox Pro application. What you're going to notice here is that now it's set up more like an Office Suite application where you have tabs at the top with the corresponding functions just below those tabs. And we have Start, Prepare, Support, Analyze and Measure, Settings and Help. Along the left side, you'll notice that we have all the same buttons with the exception of Select, which has been added. But we can move our object, rotate it, scale, and mirror our object on the left, just like we did in the basic version. So when we select the Start tab, we have most of the same functions we had in the menu options in the basic version. We have New Project, Open an existing project. We can create or import a new file or bring in a new file. Recently opened, so anything that you've, the last 5, 10 files that you've recently opened will show up there. You can bring those in automatically. You can also save your project. You could save all as, so if you have multiple items on your build plate, you can go ahead and save all those. You can merge exports by combining all of those objects on your build plate into one 3D object. You have selection export, so anything you select, let's say you have 10 items but only 5 selected, you can export those 10. And then, of course, add machine. So there are 2 places to add a machine, here at the top and again at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to add a machine. So let me pause the video right here and just talk a little bit about adding your machine. Some of the older versions of printers that we may have may not be compatible. And I have a relatively newly upgraded printer, an Epax printer that unfortunately is not compatible currently with Chitubox Pro. So I'm going to have to continue using the basic version until it is compatible at some point in time, or until they come up with a firmware update. So before you do decide to purchase Chitubox Pro, double check and make sure that the firmware of your printer is either compatible with the Chitubox Pro application or there is a firmware update for you to install on your printer. Now I will say Chitubox Pro does make it very easy to add in a printer. So you just hit the Add Machine button and then select the manufacturer. Again, not every printer here is compatible with Chitubox Pro, but just take note of that. I have an Epax printer, an X1K 2K monitor or monochrome, so I'm going to add that. So we'll just select that printer there. We also have the standard size of the layer height we want, and we can also get a default resin that we want to use. So for instance, if you typically print in one kind of resin, you can make that your default resin. And I'm going to select the general purpose resin here, and then we're going to move on to the thickness of the layer height. So you can see I can adjust that next. So one of the other things I like about Chitubox Pro is that all your printers, if you have multiple printers, are listed here at the bottom. So anytime I click on a specific printer, all the corresponding resins will show up here on the right-hand side. And I can select whatever resin I want to print with, and as long as I've made my adjustments, when I go to slice my model, I don't have to go in and open up a new window tab and go ahead from there. I'm just going to go and import a model here, and when you import a model, if there's anything Chitubox finds that it thinks is wrong with it, it's going to bring up this dialog box telling you that it needs to be repaired. You have the option of pressing yes to automatically repair it or cancel to cancel the repair and then go on to the modeling or the 3D printing setup. And here you can see I brought in my model. I've scaled it up a little bit because this came in a little bit small. I was trying to do a low poly model here just to see how I would go about doing the support systems for this. So I'm going to just tweak the settings here for the scale, and I'm going to show you here, just like you did in Chitubox Basic, you have the constraints for the print size of your particular printer. So if your model scale is too large for your printer, you will see the parts that won't get printed or that are off the build plate and build size will show up as red, and anything that can be printed will show up as blue. You can go ahead and change these, and I'll cover the color settings under the settings tab later. For the most part, the tabs at the top of Chitubox Pro are set up in kind of an order that you'd be using them. Start, prepare, repair, support, things like that. Now, the repair, I would probably put that second, because if you're going to have a model problem, you're going to have, you're going to want to do that first. But in this case, I went over to the prepare tab, and we're going to bring up the hollow option, and you can see that the hollow option is has a little more detail, a few more controls that we had from the basic version. And this allows us to make a few more changes, although, very similar to what we had before. We can adjust our size of the wall thickness for hollowing, whether or not we want to watch the animation, which sometimes is cool, but not necessary. If we want to do infill, the support or how we want our infill to look, the density as a percentage of printing, and then we can apply that or cancel and move on to the next step. So if we want to hollow it out, we just hit that hollow button and it'll run through its animation and hollow the model out for us. And of course, once you've hollowed out your model, you're going to have to drill out a hole. So find the place where you want to put the hole for the resin to come out of. Make sure that hole is big enough. I don't think I made it very big when I made the hole for this particular model. And I probably wouldn't have put it in the top of the head if I was going to print this. But I went through and I did it anyway just to do a test. Again, Chitubox, when you dig out a hole into your model, will bring up a dialog box. So you just click that. It'll bring up a dialog box to allow us to make adjustments. Now, I really, really like the fact that everything is kind of graphical in Chitubox Pro, so that if you're new to 3D printing, or even if you just want to quickly look at things, you can see things here at a glance, and it gives you the corresponding reference. So I can see that the edge numbers, I can make my hole a little more detailed. The little indicators pointing to which settings I'm changing. There's no guesswork. You're seeing it here. As I make the changes to the numbers, it makes the changes on the diagram to the left, which is really convenient for a lot of people. Also, then you can kind of put your hole somewhere on your model. It'll follow the surface of whatever area you're working on that particular model, which is really convenient. And once you find that place, you just click and it'll put the hole on your build plate, or the plug for that hole on the build plate, and it'll hollow or put a little hole wherever you select it. Another really nice new thing in Chitubox Pro is the add tag option, and add tag is kind of a convenient way for you to add either an indented text line or an extruded text line to any particular model that you want. You can put it anywhere you'd like. You could, like in this case, I could put it along the base. I could add it to my model. However, just keep in mind that unfortunately we have no control over the text once we add it, and it's only added parallel to the screen. It doesn't rotate around with your model. So if you wanted to orient it in a specific way, you actually have to rotate the model to get the text to show up in the correct orientation. It was a little cumbersome to get used to, but once you do that, you just type in the verbiage you want, you add in the font you're going to use, the model that you're going to be adding it to, the size of the font, and the depth of either the indentation or the extrusion. And once that's done, hit apply, and then you can bring that over to your model. And again, if you look closely, it's oriented parallel to the screen and not the model. So if you wanted to rotate that, you actually have to rotate your model to fit the text. That's a little awkward. I'd like to see that change, but for now, that's pretty cool. If you want to mark certain things like with your website information or maybe a model number that you didn't do in design work, you could go ahead and edit here. Or let's say you're printing 5 copies of the same thing, and each of those are going to be for different purposes, or you want to serialize them, you can put little numbers on them to indicate which versions they're for. Okay, so if you ever made a model and the model might have had an error in it, you couldn't figure out that error when you brought it into Chitubox Basic, we now have a few more repair options that are built into Chitubox Pro. These are a little more detailed, a lot more mathematically exclusive to actually repairing the model. For instance, we can close holes, we can close all holes, we can do stitching now, we can make changes to the orientation of each repair. We can delete duplicate faces and intersections. That's all possible here. I think most of us would rather handle that in modeling, but you do have some of these features here, and the rudimentary repair options may help some of us to fix models that we either download off the internet or that we just didn't see errors when we were designing our models. So keep that in mind. Play with those as you see fit. I did have about a 60-40% success ratio on repairing models. In some cases, it kind of just messed up the orientation of the faces. In other cases, it worked really great. So, it depends on whatever you're printing in your model. Okay, the next step would be to move over to the support tab. Now, the support tab is for your structural lattice work support for 3D printing, not technical support. That's handled in a different area. We'll get to that. So when you click on that tab, it's going to analyze your model. It's going to bring up the settings for all your support. So on the left, you can see we have some new options that we didn't have, obviously, in Chitubox Basic. On the right, you can see there's a bunch of settings that we were used to a little bit with Chitubox Basic, but have been expanded to cover other areas here. Now, on the left, you have little shapes that you can select and circle around your model, and that will allow you to go and add in structural support to your printing. Or if you're like me and you like to do custom support work and you like to work with your models individually and add in your own supports, you have that option too, but you have a lot more flexibility when it comes to that. So first, let me say kudos to the development team over at Chitubox, because I'm going to pause the video here and I'm just going to talk about a few things here before we move on. Let's just take a quick look at all these little options here at the bottom of the screen. If you notice, there are 9 options that we have at the bottom that give us different versions of supports that we can use. I think that's fantastic. If you want to change the way you connect your support materials to and from support structures or lattice work directly onto your model, this gives you default angles that you can play with, and I think that's fantastic. And with this version, I started using the one on the left, or actually the one on the right, which is a tree structure for jewelry printing. If you're going to be doing a lot of 3D printed jewelry or smaller models, that thing came in handy, and I just fell in love with that particular option. The other thing I love about the support setup page is that we have this new window here on the middle of the viewport here, the right side of the viewport, which gives us the option to adjust any of the particular sizes that we have on our model and how these support structures, the size and depth of the supports, go into and exit our model. Now, I'm also going to jump to another thing that I found absolutely fantastic was the symmetrize the supports. If you click this button, and you can symmetrize your supports. So you're going to click that, it's going to bring up this little window, and it's going to say, where do you want to symmetrize it along the x-axis. What's really fantastic about this, and take note, you can add your supports, and it adds them to both sides of your model. So if you wanted to create multiple supports in the same way, one of the things I hated about manually adding my supports in Chitubox Basic was I had to kind of try to get my supports in the same location on either side. Here you can see I was having a little issue because I had the depth of the model too low. But if I add my supports out on one side, it duplicates it on the other. And I think that's just fantastic. Thank you, Chitubox, for adding that. Here's another kudo for Chitubox. I think it's important in this case that we have a graphical user interface for our support setting, sizes, and structure. I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand. It does take a lot of work to do this from a software development site or a system, but if you do this, you're going to make it much easier for the user to want to use your software. And here you can see we have this beautiful display about how deep our model supports are going to break into our model, how wide they may contact, the thickness of each support, the size of the rafts that we're going to use. And here you can make changes to each and every step of your model. So for instance, if we look at here, we can adjust the contact, and you can see I'm spreading out that contact. By making that bigger, for instance, in the jewelry industry, we could actually make a sprue out of that to get to an area where possibly we couldn't add one for casting. But it's really nice. We have very fine control. We can go down to 0.02 millimeters, but that's going to be too little. It might be good if you're using a tree structure on a 3D styled model of a character, and maybe you're just trying to get the finger support there. But I think for the most part, you're going to stick around 0.2, 0.3 millimeters in size, and you can adjust your depth according to your model. This is a fantastic tool to use if you really want to go in and customize your model supports. And to be honest, this is where I spent most of my time working with Chitubox Pro. I really enjoyed this part of the software because, like I said, because I do a lot of jewelry design, I have to make a lot of custom supports. I can't rely on just generic settings to add supports to my model, as it may corrupt the model or actually, when I try to remove those supports, damage the 3D printed model before I can go into casting. So these are things that you need to be aware of when you're working with Chitubox or any slicer in particular. But I think Chitubox Pro is making this a whole lot easier. And again, just because I was really impressed, I'm just going to cover a little bit more about these. We do have these 9 settings for our support structures, and this allows you to build how you'd like your lattice work to show up. And I think this itself was just a godsend to add to this. I think this helps people who do character models or prototypes, or in my case, jewelry, or anything that you want 3D printed. This is going to help a lot. And once you've completed all your support structures for your printing, you can come over to the Analyze and Measure tabs. You can select Printer here, and this gives you the default settings for your printer. Typically, you wouldn't be making many changes to this. I typically don't. And we can also go and take a look at the next setting, which is the default slicer settings. So here you can see we have what we used to have on our setup or settings tab. Now we have resin, print, G-code, and advanced. These are very similar to what we used to have in Chitubox Pro, or what we still have in Chitubox Basic. We still have those in the basic version, but we have a few more options here under the print settings, and you can go in here and really make changes to each of your resins based on the specific printing that you're doing. And all of these settings are probably a little overwhelming for most people, but it's always a good idea to have a basic understanding at least of the first column, which is your layer height, your bottom layer count, the exposure time, the bottom layer exposure time, and so on that first column. And I often suggest people to have the light delay or light off delay set for at least 1 or 2 seconds, just because that helps keep your display from overheating. And of course, if you're upgrading from Chitubox Basic or the Chitubox Free version, and you're going to buy the Pro version subscription, you can import all of the resin settings into your current printer settings. So for instance, if I go to Chitubox Basic, I can export all my resin files that I've created and modified for the resins that I use, and I can import them into Chitubox Pro, specifically for the printer that I have set up in the tab. You'll also notice that we do have grayscaling still, but we have a little more specific details to grayscaling. We can actually go ahead and adjust the levels from 0 to 255. Those 256 settings, I think, might be a little complicated for a lot of people, and if you just leave the basic anti-aliasing levels and grayscale levels to default, you'll probably do okay. On all of my example prints, they worked really, really well, and I was happy with the printing. It took me a little while to tweak in the resin settings again. For some reason, they didn't come out quite the same, and there must be a little bit different code in the slicing software. But I did notice that most of my prints, when I got them tweaked, were absolutely perfect. And there's one more thing that I'd like to cover. We do have much more better detection for detecting islands in Chitubox, and it does give you the ability to go back, and while you're doing the support structures in your support settings tab, you can actually go in there and have Chitubox look for any missing islands that you didn't get, which is really good. We have a lot more control over our model placement, and we can go through and make many more tweaks than we could in Chitubox Basic. I think if you look at Chitubox Pro compared to Basic, Basic just gives you the ability to go ahead and make minor changes to your support structures, where Chitubox Pro actually goes ahead and allows you to do some basic modeling, as well as many more ways to find out where your print might fail, by giving you access to island locations, by giving you much better support structures and support ladder structure, and making available to us the ability to tweak all the settings before we actually send a file to the printer. For example, on this particular model, where I've marked all my islands on the model itself for support, you can see anything in red is a place that I probably either have an error in printing or probably should add some kind of a support to. And that's very convenient, especially for some models that are a little larger that you can't really find them. And I can go ahead and add support to those areas as necessary. This particular model I'm not going to go ahead and print, but I just wanted to play with it because it gives us a lot of detail. This was more of a 3D character for a game model I'm working on. So I don't want to ramble on too much, but we're going to cover a little bit of the settings tab here, and I just want to cover a little bit of what you can do here. You can change pretty much all of the default functions of Chitubox Pro and go on from there. You also have access to your license key. You can check for updates, the manual, factory settings, reset, and create shortcuts for keyboard shortcuts to your version of Chitubox Pro. You can also add in a plugin when it becomes available. Currently, the only plugin available is one for the Anycubic Photon mono printer. You can have access to technical support and, of course, get the splash screen here. So you have control over the color and appearance of Chitubox here. You can change all your default settings to make it work a little bit better for you. And again, the shortcuts for keyboard shortcuts, you could change to whatever you find convenient. I think one of the things that I found a little bit annoying with Chitubox Pro was that it kept crashing on me. And I suppose maybe had I changed the default settings for the graphics card, I might have been a little bit better off. But I did not do that until later on during my recording of this. I did find that some of the settings and options that we have in Chitubox Pro seem to be maybe left over from development time that maybe a lot of users don't need access to, but obviously the more the better, because some people do like that. I think that's one good thing. I'm not particularly fond of subscription software, and while I think Chitubox Pro is a really excellent program to use, I think you have to really find a way to justify $170 per year to afford software like this. I think it's probably worth it for most people who have multiple printing needs, and they have maybe 10 or 12 printers and they're doing a 3D printing business. I think for the guy who's a hobbyist at his home and he's just tweaking models and doing design work on his own, this might be a little overkill. Those are my personal feelings. Again, Chitubox is a great application, the basic version. I love the Pro version. I think it's just full of great things that we in the industry need. And for me, the support functions built into Chitubox Pro are fantastic. And for that, I think it's just worth it. But again, you have to justify it. If you're doing this more as a hobby, this might not be the version that you'd want to upgrade to. If you are doing this, if you're doing 3D printing professionally, or in like my case, I do a lot of jewelry design work in 3D printing, it's well worth it. So that's my thoughts, guys. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in getting more details, there's a lot of versions, there's a lot of reviews on YouTube about Chitubox Pro. I'm just giving you my honest opinion. I think it's a really good program for people who use it professionally. I think if you're just a hobbyist, it's probably a little overkill. Take care and have a great day.